Afternoon, John. You all right?
Not bad, buddy. Yeah, apart from the abysmal result that I just had to endure.
No, I didn't want to talk to you about the football, mate. I thought it was
Yeah, let's not go there.
that's another conversation we'll have. But yeah, so welcome to this week's episode of Two Blokes on the Phone. As you can probably see, we have another bloke joining us for today's conversation.
Yeah, well, I just thought I'd reach out today, and thankfully Leigh was at a spare end, as it were, and I really appreciate coming on board. I've known Leigh since I was a teenager back in the day. It makes me sound really old, but I am. So, yeah, Lee's someone I known when I was growing up down in Kent, and so yeah, I just thought it'd be really interesting, just having a conversation with somebody, and yeah, we'll talk about that. So, how you doing, Lee? All right?
I'm all right, mate. Yeah, good. Yeah, surviving all this strangeness and weirdness that's going on in the world at the moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all
and we all, yeah,
all a bit surreal at the minute, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah, straight.
yeah. I mean, it's just difficult what to know. You got a day off like me, and I'm like, well, what do you do? Not a lot.
Yeah, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, touch wood. I'm lucky because I live right by the sea, as you know. It's a nice place, and I can go up and walk on the seafront, or go up into the country park or the golf course or whatever. So it's being here, back down in Kent. Obviously, I've been all over the place, but back down in Kent now. But it's thankfully it's a nice place to be in a situation like this. Do you know what I mean? There's places where I've lived in the past where, had we been in this situation now, I wouldn't want to be living there. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
central London and places like that. You literally, if everything's closed, there's not many places to go, and there's not many places that you can go that won't be full of people. I mean, I can imagine Hyde Park and Regent's Park and places like that, and Haywards Heath are absolutely heaving.
yeah.
So but around here, there's so many places you can go and do what you need to do, exercise and walk and just be in nature or whatever, and be pretty much on your own.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really true. I'm quite lucky. Sort of, I live out just about 4 or 5 miles outside Oxford, and we're out in the sticks. And thankfully, you can go out and go places, and you're not hardly going to bump into anybody, and you've got all the basic needs around. So I don't need to go anywhere. I can imagine it'd be horrendous if you're living in London,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
all that close proximity. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's really interesting. I mean, the reason I reached out to you is just thinking about, and as I sort of spoke to you, and invited you in earlier today, suddenly having that sort of conclusion that all of my networks and all of the people I know, I mean, I know Stuart because of football, I know you because of music, and predominantly most of the people I know are because of those networks. And it's
Mm.
really interesting how that happens. I mean, it might be worth interesting, and maybe it would literally go over Stuart's head, but it'd be interesting to sort of reflect a little bit back on, obviously, people that don't know you, since day dot that I've known you, you've been really heavily into the hip hop music scene, graffiti, DJing, dancing, obviously, when your knees were still working.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. Why would you say you got into that in the first place? What do you think it was that resonated? Because obviously we lived in a heyday when there was lots of music choices,
Mm.
but that's something that was really alien to a lot of people around us. We were a very
Yeah.
select few in those days.
Yeah. I think when I was at school, very early 80s, it was very, very tribal. The music scene, the fashion, everything, it was very tribal. You were either this or you were that, or you were that, or you were that. There was the rude boys, that were into two-tone and ska. There were the skinheads that were into reggae. There were the punks. There were the then kind of developing the new romantics that were into sort of Adam and the Ants and all of that sort of stuff. Then you had like the kids that were just into reggae. You had kids that were into heavy metal and rock. You had kids that were into prog rock. You had all these different tribes, and all those tribes identified with that particular music and the fashion and whatever that went with that. And I didn't find myself fitting into any of those categories at that time. We're talking about sort of 1979, 80.
Yeah.
I was just kind of a geeky kid that was into Star Wars, and I was into sketching and drawing. I was into, anything futuristic. I loved science fiction movies and animation and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have a musical direction because I liked a lot of all sorts of things. I liked a bit of two-tone. I liked a bit of, heavy metal. I liked a bit of rock. I liked a lot of electronic music was my kind of first passion. I liked a lot of kind of soul and disco. And, I was one of those kids that was into whatever kind of was on top of the pops. Do you know what I mean? We were into Adam and the Ants. We were into all of that. So I can't say that as a kid at that point, probably I'd say first year of secondary school, when all these tribes were really splintered, I didn't fit into any of those categories because I kind of liked a little bit of everything that they liked. I liked with the two-tone, I liked the loafers that they used to wear, and the mods. I used to like the Parkers, the army surplus gear, and the New Romantics. I kind of liked the big baggy trousers, and so I didn't really identify with any of that until I would say around the time of Ultravox Vienna, and when electronic music really became, known to us through the charts. Top of the Pops and the top 40 was all we really had. So, that's what you heard, that's what you saw. And I think it was, for me, getting into hip hop came through being into electronic music and robotics.
Yeah.
Definitely 100%. If I hadn't have been into doing robotics originally from about Christmas of 1980 is when I saw Jeff Harrison outside Debenhams in Folkestone doing his busking act. You'll remember him. He used to wear a bowler hat, little John Lennon glasses. He was a disco dancer. So he used to do his little his busking act, and he'd do a bit of disco dancing, a bit of tap dancing, and he'd do a bit of mime as well. And I remember this one Christmas, it was late night shopping, Christmas of 1980. And me and Jay Adams we'd been taken to late night shopping by my grandparents. And we were outside Debenhams, and he was busking, just so happens, in front of the toy window, which was right on the corner where the last door is. And you've got the corner to go down to the bus station. That was the toy window, that corner. And he was doing his act there. So we'd stopped there to look at the Star Wars toys. We're trying to look in the window at these things, and there's this bloke doing all this stuff, and we were like, oh God, we'll wait for him to finish, and then we'll have a look, And then in the middle of his act, he was doing his disco stuff, and he stopped and he put on another piece of music, which I can't remember what it was, but I know it was something electronic. I think it was like a Giorgio Moroder or something like that. And he put that on, and he started doing mime, and he did the Man in the Box, and he did the all of that. And it's the first time. Now, people always credit Jeffrey Daniels, Top of the Pops, 1982, as seeing the backslide for the first time when he did. But now, for me, that night, it was Jeff Harrison. He did the thing with the umbrella. We opened the umbrella, and he's walking into the wind with it, and then he's put it over his back, and he did the backslide, like the wind was dragging him, back.
But that was fairly commonly, wasn't it, really? Mime artists were doing that for, decades before.
Oh, yeah. But then what it was is because we saw him, I'd seen Robert Shields on the Muppet Show, and I'd seen sort of various other little glimpses of stuff. And it was a bit of a playground craze for a while when everyone would just be miming, baking cake or driving a car or something like that. It wasn't like we didn't associate it with music until I saw
that's the key, isn't it? Putting it together with music.
Yeah, that's it. I saw this guy, and he was doing this mime, but he was doing it to music, and we were like, wow, what, that's kind of, it blew our minds, as kids. We were like, this guy's doing this weird, and he was doing the robot, he was doing the disco dance robot, so he wasn't doing proper robotics. It was all a bit sort of like that Sheila B. Devotion thing with a guy dressed up in the suit and all that, but it was enough to that inspiration to want more. So then we'd sort of be actively looking in
So yeah, I'm just curious as to what do you think you found your passion? Do you think that's what you accidentally stumbled across then?
Yeah, that night, but that was the turning point. That was the catalyst. That was the when I looked at him doing it, I wasn't interested in his disco dancing and his tap dancing and all that. As soon as he stopped that, put another tape in or whatever, or played the next tune, and he played this electronic music, might have been Kraftwerk, I honestly can't remember, Jay might remember. And then he just started doing this thing that was like it, because it wasn't like dancing. You got to remember, we're 11, 12-year-old boys, and dancing wasn't the coolest thing to do really in Hive.
You just stand in the corner watching the girls dance.
Yeah. If you sort of got up and did dancing at a school disco, you'd probably get beaten up, because it was like the school disco, a room full of girls dancing and a whole load of blokes all standing around the edge, all just watching. Do you know what I mean? And the only time you'd ever dance is if you got invited for a slow dance with a girl. Other than that, bit, I hesitate to say it, but it was a bit puffy to dance.
Yeah.
And the kids that were into disco dancing and that sort of thing tended to get like ostracized, or they'd be in the dance club with the girls after school. Do you know what I mean? And they kind of got a bit of a bad rap, even though it was probably they were the coolest kids in the school. They got to dance with the girls, and the girls really loved them, but we kind of saw this thing that this guy was doing, which was A, it was to music, and B, it was cool, and C, it was still quite blokey, because it was quite sort of, robotics by its own, sort of entity is quite masculine. It's quite a masculine looking thing. It's not a...
Yeah, now you mention it, I don't really know many, you probably know better than me, sort of female robotic dancers in that sense.
There were a few sort of coming into the 80s. There was Barbie Wilde from Shock, who was one of the quite famous ones. There was a robotics, which were a couple of girls from London. I can't remember the name that they went under now, but they kind of went on to do other things in the entertainment industry. So they kind of got into other fields like we did from the robotic dance. There were a few, yes, but there weren't anywhere near. It's kind of like the whole breaking scene. There's a few girls that are breakers who are very high end, but not as many as the scene would like. You know what I mean? It should really, if it should be 50-50. Do you know what I mean? It should be that. Yeah. But unfortunately, because of the kind of masculine macho battle kind of attitude of the whole kind of hip hop community in general, it does tend to be more blokey.
Yeah, I mean, and that must have changed when you were a kid. Obviously, you're a little bit younger than us, Stuart. I'm just thinking, do you recognise any of that tribalism when you were at school, or do you think it evened itself out and people were just? I noticed that generally it was whatever's in the charts is different to what Leigh's describing. Most kids, when you were at school, were probably just into charts and that was it.
Yeah,
and didn't want to stand out. We wanted to stand out, really.
In sort of showing my age now, but in 2000, when I left school and went to college, it was sort of like the garage scene. Well, in my opinion, burst on the scenes, like So Solid Crew, and you were hearing about all the different sort of things that happened with garage, and then Eminem was sort of, but well, once again, kind of came into people's fruition. But there was nothing like Leigh was saying earlier, where at school or college, you'd have the different tribalisms as such.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting because I think when I reflect back, I'm quite fortunate to have gone through the period in time that I went through, because music seemed to become more bland, although I get lots of people would argue with that. They'll have their own passions, but even within, and I know Leigh and I have talked about this before, about although there was a uniform, each tribe had its uniform. Actually, what we were trying to achieve was a sense of individuality rather than a uniform. So even though we had things that were very similar, we'd all where something there was a variation on a theme. You'd never go out looking identical like mods would, as an example. I think that's the really interesting part, that like most teenagers, we were just trying to find our identity. And this thing came along. And for whatever, I mean, me, like, I remember those moments that Leigh was talking about, and watching the guy busking and just thinking, wow, I wish I could do that. And you'd go home and practice and do bits and pieces. But it was more like the music, for whatever reason. Like, I remember the day that I sat down watching Top of the Pops, like Leigh said, and Grandmaster Flash came on with the message, and I was like, shit, that's different. That's something. And even though I wasn't a black kid living in the in the Bronx in New York, I was like, oh, I'm here. He's talking about real stuff. And then the beat and the music, and because of that overlap that Leigh was talking about, sort of listening to new, the new romantic stuff and the synth stuff, and being really into Human League, and it's just like, even like we were talking, Leigh, earlier. We were talking earlier with Stuart. I was talking about like learning and how one thing leads to another. So I started listening to one type of music, and then, well, especially with hip hop, where did that sample come from? Where did that piece of music come from? And then somebody informing you, oh, that went on to this. Oh, well, let's go on and listen to all of that. That's how you end up getting into craft work. But then realizing, well, in 1979, they were in the charts. But, oh, that sample's from that, is it? And then getting into a whole new genre of music. And it just keeps expanding and expanding. And once you started to understand about the elements of hip hop, I think that's the thing that really fascinated me, was, understanding the 5 elements, that it wasn't just, the ambition was to be a rapper. Actually, there's a DJ making the music. There's somebody that spray painted the backdrop. There's people dancing, what I mean? And like, just really magical memories. And I'm just wondering, sort of trying to sort of pull it all together. If you had to pick, for both of you, here's an open question then. If you had to pick one song, what's that song? One song that you say, that's my favorite tune. That's the one I'm going to go back to every single time.
For me, it's that sort of thing, isn't it, where you say to someone, if you could only listen to one song on repeat for the rest of your life, what would that song be? The song that you would never get tired of, the song that would always evoke some kind of memory or fire you up or give you that, because it has to have that. I think music has to have that. If it doesn't give you any of that, then it's not. It's got to have nostalgia. It's got to have, even when you hear a new piece of music, the day after you've heard that, it's got nostalgia, because you heard it a day ago. It's because time, constant, constant emotion. For me personally, I would have to say it's "On the Face, the Soul" by Hashim. I can listen to that song just over and over.
When was the first time you heard that then?
When it was on Electro 2, when I got a friend of mine, Noel Hogan, always used to go and buy tapes from Hummingbird Records. He always used to, I don't know how, but he always got them before us. And he'd always ring you up on your landline, because that was all you had. Oh, I've got electricity, you got it, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd bring it round to my house, and I had like 2 tape recorders hooked up together with the DIN leads. So I'd record, and we'd pirate these tapes. And the first time I heard that was on, I'd heard like snippets of it on the radio. Like, I think John Peel played it, and it was on a few things, but I'd never heard enough of it to kind of appreciate it. And it was on Electro 2, and that's where I heard it fully for the first time, and was just like, whoa, that whole album, it was all built around, for me, it was built around that one song, and that was the song that made that album for me so monumental, because it had that track on it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, Electro 1 obviously was the first in the series. We loved that, and for me, the best tune on that is Reaganomics. That I love that tune. But Electro 2 came out and we heard Alna Face, and just that introduction, just like, it's time, and then the beat drops in and it's just like, whoa, what is this?
It's like, it's a lot, you know, you stole my thunder really, because I would have probably said the same, but it's a case of that adrenaline rush. As soon as it hits, there's an adrenaline rush that kicks in.
Yeah.
And you just think, well, you got to dance. Why are you not dancing? You're looking around at everybody. Why are you not dancing? What's the matter with you?
Yeah. It's that sort of instant transportation back to, like you said, to those golden years when you first heard that tune. Every time I hear it, it's almost like the first time hearing that song, because you get catapulted back into that era. And it's like, like you say, you know, I've been to hip hop jams in, you know, the 90s and the 2000s and whatever. And, you know, the DJ drops that. He could be playing breaks and funk and R&B, and he drops that in, and the whole place just erupts. You know, all the B-boys, they're all fighting to get into the circle, and the poppers are trying to get into the circle, and it just evokes that whole kind of nostalgia more than any other track, I think personally, that gets played, you know, in that kind of scenario. You've got the obvious ones as well, like Planet Rock and you know, Breaker's Revenge and hip hop bebop and all those sorts of things, but nothing, I don't think, fires up. If you watch like DJ Qbert, for example, he normally drops that into his DJ set somewhere when he's just practicing and cutting or whatever, but you watch the crowd, they'll all be sitting there just kind of watching him, and he's doing his thing, and then he drops that beat on, that on the face beat, and you watch the people, the crowd at the back, all of a sudden they're all sort of going, whoa, and they're doing this, and you can see that they've suddenly...
It is an adrenaline rush. It's the best way I can describe it. You know, and I'm sure other people will have that with us. What's yours, Stuart? Have you got one song?
I'm struggling to answer that one, and I've got loads.
Give us a clue. One song that you think back to your teenage years memory, because I think Leigh's right. It's just like there's got to be a song. Everybody must have a song, I think, that when they hear that song, it takes them back to that moment when they first heard it.
I can't necessarily say song as a teenager, but growing up, like I think like most kids, well, potentially like most kids, I like Michael Jackson, but I was like Rock With You. I just like the beat in the background and the sort of the visual.
That's a tune.
But that's the one that always comes in my head.
What was the first gig you ever went to, Stuart?
Me? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is going to sound quite embarrassing, but I was on babysitting duty, so I can prove this. It was Blue.
Blue?
Yeah, I was babysitting for people. I could vouch for that.
We'll take your word for it. Guilty pleasure.
But then I've been to see 50 Cent, people like that as well. So the Streets as well, they were good. I like them.
Yeah. I mean, I remember sort of, if I had to pick a number two, because Leigh's stolen my number one, then I think for me, in keeping with what you've been saying, really, it's Gwen McCrae, All That I'm Giving, which for me is just, as well as being an epic tune, and the bass drop is immense, but it was the moment I walked through. I was going to see Public Enemy at Brixton Academy. Tim Westwood was hosting, and as soon as I opened the double doors, the tune dropped, and that bass line, and it was literally like a wave of the bass coming over me, and it's just like I said, it's that emotional memory. It stuck. I was like, I'm never going to forget this moment. And now I've got a tune to that moment. I could have, you know, the irony of, I could have walked in the middle of another tune. It would have been, all right, yeah, epic, I'm here, so on and so. But the timing of that coming together, and it literally started as I opened those big glass double doors that they had and walked in to like that long dip down. I was like, that's going to stick with me forever. And every time I hear it, I'm just transported back. And it's just not, like I said, not only is it an epic tune, but just, like I say, that emotional memory that's linked with it. It's bonded now. But like, I can't hear that tune without remembering you know, one of the first gigs that I ever went to, you know, by myself, you know, in a strange place. Yeah, some weird and wonderful times, really. But it's interesting how. Why do you think you've stuck with that, Leigh? Why do you think that passion has stuck with you? Because I know I got distracted later on in life with football, and always loved my hip hop, always will, but got distracted by football, went down that path a bit, and I know many people did. Why do you think you've stuck with it all of this time then?
Probably because of the whole kind of continuation of how it evolved, and how I evolved and moved with it. And because obviously we started off with robotics and electro, then we got into body popping, and we tried our hand at breaking, and kind of going back to that kind of tribal thing. This was something that we got into that had so many different elements to it that you could try, and that you could generally be sort of all right at one of them. So even if you couldn't rap, or you couldn't break dance, or you couldn't DJ, you might be good at graffiti, or you might be good at beatboxing, or somebody that wasn't good at graffiti. Because I think we all pretty much tried our hand at all of it at one point, to see, as these elements became included into our knowledge of the culture, we would try each thing to see what we were the best at. And I mean, for me, it was the body popping and the graffiti that I kind of stuck with. I got into DJing through going to the Mud Club with Jay. We started going to, they did some like the electro revival nights that Jay Strongman did there, and we were like, bloody hell, this is awesome. We need to recapture this where we live. So we started doing our own little nights at the Gruta restaurant in the basement, me and Jay, and we were just playing electro and the sort of hip hop that we loved. Because at that time, that was about 87, I would say, kind of in between the Solid Soul and Soul Train, 620 Soul Train era, and the Kent Soul Festival, in between that and the Rare Groove era. So it's this chunk in the middle. And we started putting our own little nights on, and then Rare Groove happened, and we got into that whole scene as well, because that was kind of intertwined with hip hop as well. Because we go to the Mud Club, you know, in our sort of 70s gear, dance to like Rare Groove and funk, and then we'd spend the rest of the night.
I have to sort of interrupt you then, Leigh. Honestly, Stuart, if you had to describe the epitome of going to a what I would call a proper club, the Mud Club was the Mutt's nuts. It was honestly, you couldn't put your drink down on a table because someone would be dancing on it.
Yeah.
Just don't put your drink down.
Yeah,
just,
I mean,
just madness.
I've had conversations with people where we've sat down and we've gone, did we dream that? Did that really happen? Was it really that good? And everyone's like, yeah, it bloody was. You know, it's hard to, because everything for everyone was there. You know, Jay Strongman, DJ, he would play funk, soul, Rare Groove, electro, you know, every kind of conceivable genre of music, and mix it. And you had this huge gamut of people that were into all these different things, and the fashion, and every week was like a different theme. So one week it would be, you'd be full on 70s gear. Next week it would be like 80s b-boy gear. The next week it would be, you know, whatever that mad theme was that Phil Salon used to put on and theme the nights around. And there would be,
I mean, there's a character as well, isn't it? Yeah, Phil was, you know, a classic story for you, people listening. You know, Stuart, just think about the scenario. You rocked up at a nightclub like you've probably been to loads of times, and I remember that night, one particular night, I was stood behind 3 or 4 of the most fittest, beautifulest girls you've ever seen, dressed to the nines, ready to go rocking out on a nightclub. And Phil went, "Not tonight, darling," and just mugged them right off, you know. And we were wearing our tatty 70s Rare Groove stuff, and he went, "In you come, lads." And it was just classic. And the looks on their faces was just like, "No, you're too normal. Go away."
Yeah, that was it.
That was classic, you know, with his wig,
Phil,
a little bit sort of squiffy.
it was his kind of his continuation of the Blitz Club. policy that Steve Strange had, that if you look normal, you weren't getting in.
Yeah.
You know, and that whole kind of, we kind of fitted into that, because we'd rock up, in 70s gear, or we'd rock up in like 80s b-boy gear with fat laces and jackets of graffiti on the back and Kangols or whatever the theme was, or we'd turn up in Vivian Westwood with the big buffalo hats on, and all that sort of thing. So we kind of got into that whole scene, and it was like it was just a melting pot of everyone and everything. You had there was gay, straight, black, white, every walk of life you could imagine was in that club, and everyone that was into every kind of scene was in that club. But it was such a,
Isn't that interesting, Lee? That melting pot. I'm glad that's the right word. That melting pot, because I'd never really experienced anything other than that. And it was very interesting having moments when we talk about us sort of being absorbed into, a black music. And then suddenly, for the first time ever, like experiencing racism because I was white. And I'd like, well, I don't understand what's going on. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced that, Stuart. Obviously, living in certain places and going, in certain areas that you worked in through your football stuff, where it was such a shock to me. It was just like, I don't understand. I like the same music as you, and I remember at the time having a black girlfriend and walking down Brixton High Street and like being surrounded by these black guys who basically, what happened, sister, sold out? And it was just, what? I don't understand. And it was the first time that I'd really come to grasp with this concept, that I'd heard the word, but never really experienced it. Obviously, I'm a white, middle class sort of guy. I don't think I'm middle class, but that's how I was perceived, I suppose. And just really interesting, that whole concept of racism that I'd only ever experienced because of that music.
Yeah, I've seen a lot at first hand, and conversations, and like with drill music and like kind of the association with that. If you listen to that, or if you listen to grime, or but I like grime. I like a lot of music in it. I think it still has tags attached to it. I think certain music.
It was the first time that like I said, it was such a shock to my system, because I'd come from going to these events and it being a melting pot, and probably the first time that I'd seen anybody that was openly gay or lesbian, first time I'd ever seen, different cultures. And, like you say, it didn't matter. We were all coming together for the music. And yet, as soon as you walked outside of the event, it was something different. Going to places like Swiss Cottage, walking in with my mates, and just being, and everybody stopping and looking at you because you're white. I just suddenly, it's probably the only glimpse, and I mean a glimpse, of what it must feel like, to be singled out in that fashion. I wonder what your experience is, Lee, bearing in mind, you're the same, ethnicity as me, and what your experiences were in that.
Well, I mean, quite a few, from going back to probably I would say the 90s, when we were still carrying the torch. I joined the B-Boy crew, Born to Rock. I'd been doing some stuff with Rocksteady Crew, and we were kind of carrying on that tradition. We were still breaking, we were still popping, we were still locking. And around the sort of 90s, the New Jack Swing kind of era, we'd all turn up to a club that we'd been booked to do a show at or whatever, or just be there. And there would be this kind of, not so much because we were white, but because we were white and doing something that wasn't perceived quite as cool as it was.
Yeah.
I mean, so that we used to get a load of stick for being still breaking and popping, and when everyone else was doing, like, the Kid and Play 2 hype dancing and all that kind of stuff. So we got a lot of aggro from that, because the majority of the crew, we were white. We had Blemmer, Tim and Raj weren't white, but me, Charlie, Spencer, and Nathan were. So, And also we got turned down from doing a Channel 4 TV show called Badass TV with Ice-T. We were booked to go on the show. You know, Ice-T had spoken to us, blah, 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 blah. And then at the 11th hour, Channel 4 rang us and they said, one of the researchers said, oh, just to kind of reiterate, you know, this is a TV show about black culture. You are all black, aren't you? And I said, well, no. Only like two of us are, you know, because at that time it was, I think Blemmer was in the crew and Colin McDonald. And they said, because we can only have the black members of the crew on the show. And we were like, well, why is that? And they were like, well, because it's a black culture show. And we were like, right, okay, but you do know, you know, the history of robotics, body pop, and b-boy, and it's always been multicultural. It was a multicultural thing from the get-go. You know, it's not specific to one ethnicity per se. It was, you know, whichever group of people that you want to pin that to, whether it be the kids in New York in the Bronx, whether it be the kids in Long Beach, in Los Angeles, whether it be the kids from Oakland in California, all that kind of stuff. So all these different links. And so they said that we couldn't do the show. So I think it was only Colin took Gucci and it might have been his brother Floyd. But yeah, so that like the black guys could only appear on that TV show. We couldn't do it.
Yeah, madness, really, isn't it? I mean, it's just like I said, it's the only time that I've recognised that there is that sort of judgment in the world. I'm also curious because I know in the past that you and I have talked about, you know, sort of mental health and stuff. And I wondered, you know, for you, Stuart, I would imagine the football has been the thing that's helped you being in that community. And for you, Leigh, music has helped you in that sense, in sort of getting through those times.
Yeah, I think both. I mean, I'm definitely not a beatboxer or a dancer by any stretch, but
yeah, I've seen you dance. So I can vouch for that as well.
Well, thanks for clarifying. But I think for me, it's like both of them have community, don't they? Like Leigh was saying, I think, you know, I don't see why there should be barriers or anything like that. And I think football, music, whatever it is, has the opportunity to sort of remove a lot of things. But I love putting my earphones on and, you know, just having a walk and listening to some music or, well, at the moment, podcasts. But both music and football have helped me massively, especially during lockdown. You know, just putting some tunes on in the background and being able to crack on with everyday chores or the course I'm doing. Yeah, both of them have been pivotal, and I think they'll continue to be as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what my life would be without music, and I know how integral it is to your life. I just wondered, you know, have you got a way of articulating how that has helped you?
Yeah, I mean, music and the hip hop in general has got me through some pretty dark times in the past, you know, without going too much into detail and long and sad stories and all that lot. But if I hadn't have had, you know, DJing, if I hadn't have had my decks, you know, set up in my room so I can just zone out and just scratch for, you know, hours on end, or, you know, to sit and draw and then come up with a design and then go out and paint that, and, you know, all those sort of things that I'm lucky enough that I've been able to do, and to sit down on the computer or whatever, or get the synths out and make some music. And those things, because they've always been there, they've always been there for me if I've needed to go to them. Do you know what I mean? Like I think we've had this discussion before, where if you, a recent trauma that I went through, you know, I just dived into the DJing and I dived into the producing music, and I got more into going out and painting again instead of kind of just sitting at home and drawing or doing it digitally. And that is, you know, it's been a saving grace for me over the years, and it's kind of kept me, you know, with a focus. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter kind of what goes on in your life. It doesn't matter what horrible things happen or things that you perceive are horrible that have happened to you. You can always go back to those things that are always there for you, even if you haven't got, let's say you haven't got decks and records and whatever. If I was just like I was when I was sort of 15 and I just had a little boombox in my room and some tapes, even that, you know, you could stick a tape on or whatever, and you could, you know, you could dance in your room, you can practice, you can, even if it's just in your head, just kind of, if you're physically, like now, you know, I'm not physically able to do a lot of that stuff, but in my mind, I can kind of come up with what I would do to that music, or, you know, put routines in together in your head. Or so yeah, there's always, for me, it's always been something that's been a constant that I can always rely on and go to should I need to have some kind of escapism. Or for me, it's normality. You know, that's my sense of normality. Everything else, like going to work and relationships and all that kind of stuff, to me is kind of outside influence. You know, it's like the castle, you know, hip hop, and for me it's like a castle, and I live within that castle. Everything else is outside those walls, and so if anything outside those affects me, I can retreat back into that castle and dive into, you know, whatever thing it is that I'm doing at that time, or, you know, DJ, make some music, do some graffiti, whatever. It's always been there for me, and it's always been that sort of catalyst that can, you know, it doesn't matter how sort of pissed off or you know, under the weather you are, or you know, you feel like, you know, you're being downtrodden and stuff. You know, you put on Ain't Nobody by Rufus and Chaka Khan, all of a sudden everything's right with the world, you know. Just pieces of, or like,
there's something about that, isn't it? I just think the word that you said there is escapism, but I think it's escapism plus. There's something about the safety of that. It's reassuring. You know what it is. You go back to tunes that you know, like we were talking about before. And I remember joking when I first started dating my wife, and you know, in relation to sort of football, and I remember saying to her, "You do realise you'll always be my second love." And she goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, Arsenal's never turned round and said to me, you know, I'm washing my hair or you're dumped. They'll always let me in. That family fraternity within football will always go, how you doing, John? Nice to see you again." No one would ever turn you away. And so I said, and I jokingly said, until you make me jump out of bed and go, yes, like when Arsenal score a goal, then you're always going to be a second love. But really deep down, I'm going, yeah, because that's been the consistent. And I get what you're saying, Leigh. That's been the consistent. It's always been there. Good times, bad times. It's just always been there. Like I said, I'd sort of dabble in and out, but music is, you know, I literally wake up every day going, what tune do I wake up? And my missus can't get her head round. What tune do I want to listen to wake up to today? And the other day, it was like The Weekend, Blinding Lights. I played it about 100 times in a row. I was like, yep, it's lifting me up. That's the mood that I want to set today. Away I go. And I'm sure that resonates with so many people. It's just like, it's escapism plus is what I would call it. You know, it's that safe place. You know, you're going back to it.
Yeah, I mean, like Leigh said about the castle, I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, and I know I do. You know, but I've not thought of it in that way before, so I'm going to definitely magpie that sort of thought. But because I'm cautious of time, lads, we haven't got much time left. So, Leigh, I'm sure I could be listening to you for quite a while. Obviously, being born in 1984, I might have missed out on quite a few things from the sounds of it, and some good nights out. And I do own a pair of Adidas Superstars, if that counts for anything. Does that make me?
That puts you on the ladder. Yeah.
Yes. But
no, it's been really good to catch up. I think it's really interesting, the topic of music, and how, like I said, the whole concept of this is two blokes and a phone. But the reason I know Leigh is through music. You know, how would I have ever met Leigh before? I don't think I would have done. How, if it wasn't for football, how would I have met Stuart? You know, and I think that's the reality of, you know, maybe the underlying theme, you know, and the details really are just specifics. But really, that underlying theme of, you know, whatever your passion is, I'm sure you've got friends. Like, just the beauty, like we talked about in the last chat, Leigh, about social media. And if it wasn't for social media, I lost contact with you for like over 25 years or whatever it was, even more probably. But if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have been able to find you again, and wouldn't have been able to have these wonderful conversations and reconnect. And you know, hopefully when lockdowns, you know, finished and, you know, normality of travel can resume, you know, we'll catch up again. But that's the beauty of those networks, I think, whether it be online, whether it be in face to face. I just think it's really interesting how of recognizing, you know, football, music, what it's that commonality, isn't it? We talk so much, I think, in the world today about things and how everybody's different, and yet it's the commonalities that really draw us together.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the music was the thing that linked us, and it's probably the thing that, because we're still aware of, and you're still aware of music, and I'm still aware of music that's happened since we lost touch, say, let's say 30 years ago, but we could still have a conversation about Blinding Lights by the weekend. You know, we would and I could say, oh yeah, I really like the Jurassic 5, and you go, oh yeah, you know, and there's still, even though you haven't had a connection for a long time, there's still a connection there that is, you know, we could sit down after 30 years of not seeing each other, and it was like picking up the conversation like it never ended.
Yeah, I mean, that blows my mind, really. And I think if anybody wants to understand, and we've talked about little bits like that before, if anybody really wants to understand the definition of a true friendship, really, it's those things happen naturally. You know, I might not see people for months or years, but the people that really get those connections, it doesn't feel like it's been 30 years. It feels like it's been 30 days.
Yeah, I mean, I still go back, you know, I can remember in vivid detail me and you standing outside the mud waiting to go in, and, you know, even what we were drinking that night. And when we went to Town and Country Club to Mantronics, we went to Beastie Boys and Run DMC and all those things there. So, you know, Toff's nightclub, Kent Soul Festival, all of those things that we used to go to and do. I still remember those, literally, like you say, as if it only happened a week ago. Do you know what I mean? And it's
if you asked me what happened last year, Lee, I couldn't tell you.
Oh, I couldn't tell you what I did yesterday, mate. You know,
that's madness, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good way of ending the chat. I mean, like you've both said, Lee and John, that sign of friendships and connections, and, you know, that checking in, having that conversation. I mean, I've not really said a lot today, but I've really enjoyed listening. And
that's got to be a first, Stuart, isn't it?
I know, yeah, it's recorded as well. But no, I think it's good for me to sort of, I mean, it felt like I was there with you when it happened. I think that's how much I've been engrossed in the conversation today. But Lee, thanks very much, mate. You know, from my point of view, I appreciate it. And John, as always, it's good to chat, good to check in. But for those of you
thanks,
that are
Lee.
watching,
thanks, Stuart. We'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, 100%. And for those that are watching, like, share, subscribe. It means a lot. And as you can see, checking in's really good. So take care and stay safe.